Welcome to the TroutCast, the only podcast that isn't about fishing.
Hello, welcome to episode number 5 of the TroutCast, the only podcast that isn't about fishing. I'm your captain, Kelgore Trout. Today we have our most special guest ever. What's up, Brian?
Hey, thank you. That's a hell of an introduction. I didn't think I was the most special, but
Well,
I'll take it.
I say that every time, but I just want to like pump you guys up, you know?
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Brian's a writer and podcaster. I'll have all the links for all of his stuff in the description below. Your podcast is called the Illegal Screen Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, the Illegal Screen is a podcast about the NBA and mixed media, mostly film, and where we think they should cross over, or places where we see similarities between the two.
So this is a good week for you.
With Space Jam 2, our minds are already deeply destroyed and perverted by
they pretty much crossed over basketball with every movie now, right?
Yeah, so the podcast is dead. They ruined it. They ruined our bit. They ruined our shtick.
God damn it.
We pretty much
They got the idea from you guys.
They got the idea from us. Liam and I wrote half of Space Jam 2, and we should have writer credits.
I heard it's really good, so good job.
Yeah, we should have writer credits as far as I'm concerned.
Now, quick question. Space Jam 1, it was really just a crossover with Looney Tunes, right?
Yeah, there wasn't any other properties in the first film. It was just Looney Tunes. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Like Gordon Gekko wasn't in it and stuff.
No, he didn't have like a sick layup while like a Droog from Clockwork Orange dunked on dunked on Michael Jordan. Yeah, they didn't happen in the first film.
That is more similar to the second one.
As far as I understand from reviews I've read and people who've seen it, that's genuinely what the second film is.
That would have been kind of nice if it was just a Looney Tunes revival, because I feel like when I was a kid, I watched like some Looney Tunes stuff. There was like, what was it, Animaniacs? And like, and that's all Looney Tunes, I think. I don't know. Maybe that's the other one.
I think it's all owned by Warner Brothers.
Whatever it is. There was like a little mini revival a little bit, but I feel like it's just been dead since then. And this could have been their opportunity to have like a big comeback with the kids, with Looney Tunes.
I think they were worried that because it's not a Disney property, there's not enough buy-in. There's not enough like cultural buy-in, even though Looney Tunes is huge. I mean, it's a
Looney
huge...
Tunes could have been like the Sigma doing their own thing, separate from Disney.
The Sigma cartoon franchise?
The Sigma cartoons.
It could have been a thing. I'm disappointed now that they're not the Sigma Looney Tune revival, where they're all talking about like how you get up at 3 a.m. and you run to work.
And you like, don't talk to women.
Don't talk to women.
Oh, Bugs Bunny could never.
Yeah. I mean... Man, I'd pay money for that.
This has nothing to do with our topic today, because we do have a kind of serious topic, although we might not take it that seriously.
Yeah, we'll see.
We're kind of talking about class mobility, or what I would call middle-class kids growing up to be broke. Basically, a few weeks ago, I posted something on Twitter about how there seems to be this large population of adults, probably mostly millennials, but I don't want to I don't want to just limit it to millennials, because I think it includes a lot of other people too.
Sure.
Who grew up like stable or secure, whatever you want to call it, maybe even upper middle class, and who went on to be basically like flat broke working class people, and they're kind of stuck there. And I want to be extremely clear that I don't mean to compare this to people who grew up in poverty or, in worse situations, because there's really no comparing it, because you always have the stability of falling back on your middle class family, right? You're able to take risks, you have a little bit more of a safety net, a systemic advantage.
Hmm.
But I think there is a cultural impact of having all these people that grew up feeling stable and who now are not stable, and they're, stuck feeling like they're in debt or in the working class or something.
Right.
So you reached out to me.
Hmm.
I got a lot of really great responses, but you reached out to me and you said you would love to come on the TroutCast and chat
Hmm.
about this from your point of view. So maybe do you want to kind of talk about what your point of view on this is?
Yeah, I mean, just I think first of all, too, I'll let everybody know, like, I'm not coming to this episode with like Census Bureau data and like citing my sources. This is just basically, I thought, a great conversational opportunity to talk about people's experiences and their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not here also to like you addressed already, compare
We're not going to solve anything.
This is not solving anything. This is
NPR.
Yeah, this is NPR. Michael Barbaro. That's not what this is about. So yeah, I was born and raised in Newport Richey, Florida, which is in Pasco County.
Mm-hmm.
It was a pretty poor area. It's had kind of a revival over the past couple of years. Some people suggest even the word gentrification gets thrown around. So
is that northern Florida?
No, we're kind of right in the middle.
Oh, okay.
We're just slightly in the middle. But so being born and raised here, my parents were definitely lower working class. It was a pretty hard time growing up.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't things like healthcare. There was an abundance of food stamps for a long time. It was robbing Peter to pay Paul to basically be able to find a stable living situation. Vehicles, especially because we're in Florida and there's no transit here that's reliable at all. Even to this day, there's no public transit that's reliable. So if you didn't have a vehicle, you really couldn't have a job unless you were fortunate enough to be really close to somewhere where you could walk there, or you were working with somebody like doing roofing and they were going to pick everybody up in the same crew truck and then take everybody to work. Which was limited depending on your physical health and how much you could do a job like that in Florida heat, which has been bad then. It's worse now. So
yeah, I imagine past a certain age, a lot of guys are not wanting to do that.
Yeah, you just can't. I did it one summer when I was 16 with my dad.
Hard
He
for
offered.
life.
Yeah, I learned really quickly that no, I wasn't even cut up for it then. So, but it was just an interesting place to grow up in because I had these really interesting groups of friends and group dynamics with friends who were absolutely middle class, or like you said, upper middle class. And I always was kind of the odd one out in a lot of ways, but it wasn't ever recognized by like anyone's parents. It was just always like, oh, he seems normal,
Yeah.
So it was an interesting experience. And after college, my college years were a very weird time. I think most people's college years are a very weird time. I never expected to go to college. I was a horrible student in high school. But now I have a master's degree. So
good job.
Things worked out, but I mean, it didn't work out for me fiscally.
Right.
So, and that's
that
a common
master's
story.
degree, price tag, right?
Yeah. I think that's what tapped me into this, is like, it's a very common story to have sort of an ascendancy where you're able to climb out of this established, you feel like things are working as planned. The system
in
is
an unexpected way almost, right?
Right. You're like, this is working as intended. And then all of a sudden you begin to notice that it starts going back again, and you're like, wait a minute, I thought I was going up. Where's this roller coaster ride of bullshit coming from?
You just kind of assume it's going to keep going up, right?
Yeah, exactly, because you're like, I'm doing all the right things, I'm doing all the things I was told to do.
The past is in the past, right?
Right. And then you quickly learn that that's all that it takes is one major life event to completely turn things back around, and 10 years of progress is undone in 2 weeks.
Yeah, pretty much.
And that's kind of, I think, my story, without getting into the details or specificity.
No, yeah, you don't have to get super personal or specific about it. It's okay.
Just that's what appealed to me about this, was coming from working class roots and finding myself and eventually my family and my wife, moving up through kind of life, and then seeing just how frail it is, and seeing that there's no safety nets, there's nothing to help you when the chips are down. And that's a very very interesting position. And I know that there are millions and millions and millions of people who are in that situation and also infinitely worse situations.
Right. I mean, a lot of people have it really bad in America, which is obviously kind of the situation we're talking about. But if you're talking about developing countries or something, I mean, it doesn't even compare. But just, you said something that stuck out in my mind, which is you said growing up, you felt like you were the odd man out, the poor kid, and like the other friends were kind of more middle class.
Right.
I think I was kind of in the middle. I definitely had friends whose parents like had a lot more money. I realize now, and it's so funny because I was the youngest, and so my mom didn't really want me to have my friends over all the time because she'd already had 2 kids do that, and I was the third.
This already.
Yeah, and so I was always at my friend's house, and one of my best friends, her mom was like a little bit, I guess, like protective or something, so she always wanted us to come over there. And from the time I was like 9 until like I graduated high school, I was always at her house, and I realize now, I'm like, oh, it was so awesome. I loved hanging out at her house. And I realize now, I'm like, yeah, because they lived in a mansion. Or like a McMansion at least, right? It was like a model home in like a gated neighborhood. And so I had these friends that definitely, like, I realize now, were better off than we were. But I also had friends that were poorer than we were. And the thing is, I don't think as a kid, I don't think I thought about it like at all.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that the kids who were like the poorer ones did. I can imagine, because I'm an adult now and I'm a poor adult, and it's all I think about. So
right.
Like,
it causes you to reflect like endlessly on both your childhood and then your young adult years.
My children. I think about that. Like my kids are going to grow up poorer than I did, which is a weird kind of sad thing to say, but it's just true. And I live in San Francisco, mostly because this has been historically a great place to work in the restaurant industry, in terms of like the minimum wage and the tipping and everything is good here. There's a lot of people who just go out to eat for like every meal. So it's been a great place to work in the restaurant industry. But these days, since COVID, it's pretty bad. I mean, I haven't even worked in like a year, but my point is that being kind of like working class in the city as a parent has really made me see things differently, because so many of the parents that I talk to on a daily basis are like millionaires. Or like, I don't know, like they like own their own place in San Francisco and stuff. And I'm like, how? And it's really weird, because I don't think that they think about it, or maybe they do, but like, I don't really think that they think about it, but I do. So
of course. And that's a different level of awareness and consciousness that isn't afforded to everybody, because at a certain point it not necessarily wealth, but just being able to say, I've accomplished the game. I've won the game. And in that sense, I'm not let me rephrase that. So they become there. It's not that they're not aware that there aren't people that have it worse or are, have difficult lives. It's just that they're very insulated from it, because typically they're not like when we're children, but when we're adults, you are congregating with mostly people in the same socioeconomic bracket. And it's very rare that you have a friend who's kind of like on the out and out all the time, compared to your life at least. And so buying a property in a major metropolitan city or area seems normal. It's again part of the process. And I remember when my wife and I, when we resided in Boston, we thought, I don't know how anyone could ever buy a property here. It just seems just not even without a child, it's impossible to buy a property here. You would need to be a millionaire. And then we moved back to our hometown, and it became the same thing where we said, I don't know how you would ever buy a property here. You would need to be a millionaire. And it's a really disheartening experience, because all of a sudden you think of like property as generational wealth, and then you're like, well, I can't afford that to my child. I don't know how I'm going to build that for them, because you are concerned about the future. and it's a very weird time to be alive. And I think more
Yeah.
people would be aware of these topics if they were actually talked about. And in the
Yeah.
mainstream culture, they're definitely not talked about at
Yeah.
all. They use the code word of opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
not
what
a
it
fan of
becomes.
that one.
Yeah, we want to expand opportunities for people,
Mm-hmm.
but what they're trying to say is that class mobility has reached a dead end. So
Right. Yeah. So obviously, I mean, it's a little bit this topic or this angle is a little bit tired, but we all know that like the baby boomers had a lot of obviously they had hardship as well, but like a lot of them had the opportunity to afford a home and,
mhm,
work towards a career and have affordable college if they went to college and all that. And
right,
now like all of that is so on the opposite end. And um I just think it's interesting that a lot of the children of like baby boomers or maybe even Gen X are never going to be able to afford those things seemingly, but they grew up feeling so comfortable, and there must be a cultural impact to that sort of thing, right? Like that
right,
has to be there has to be a cultural impact, and I'm wondering what it will be because for me it's been radicalizing, and I think maybe that's the definition of being radicalized
sure,
because like I used to see things very differently and then I experienced something and now I see things the other way. And so
right,
I don't think that I don't think it's a good thing overall because a lot of people are in very bad circumstances,
right.
but I think maybe the radicalization could be seen as a positive thing. Maybe.
Yeah, I think I see where you're coming from. I don't know myself either. I do
Yeah.
agree with you that you're kind of what you postulate that, what this has resulted in is the radicalization of a lot of people, maybe an entire
Mhm.
generation. But the way that that has manifested is very different for every person. And
Mhm.
in some instances, a lot of people who are, I think, still tapped into the typical political landscape are
Mhm.
still falling into the same traps posited by both parties in a lot of ways. And they say, oh, well, I feel completely differently than anyone who's in charge or any pundit is
Mhm.
representing. I feel completely different, but they touch on one or two things that actually speak to me. So therefore, I still have representation.
The only way they relate to a huge portion of the population is that they bring up Jesus or something.
Yeah. I mean, no, I think that's part of it, but I think it's also
Yeah.
just something like saying times are tough, and we know that.
Mhm.
Or saying
Oh,
like,
yeah.
here's a problem that we know you're experiencing with, say, I don't know, debt reduction or
Mhm.
whatever, and we know it's a problem. And they say that, and
Mhm.
that's enough for people to go, see, someone in charge knows it's a problem, which means they're working towards fixing it.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
and that's that feeling, that empathy, even if it's false, even if it's fake, even if it's just posturing, can be very powerful. And that's why when people do feel radicalized, if you're talking day to day just to someone who's working class and not talking about the specifics of politics, but just about their
Mhm.
lives and commiserating and seeing how often there's so much overlap, regardless of how they feel personally. That's never represented in any modern political landscape, like at all. But
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I know that people like culturally things are represented kind of like, Democrat, Republican. People
yeah,
feel
it's a
that
cult,
divide a little
right?
bit, but I never feel like anyone actually talks about the working class like in terms
No,
of like politicians. And sometimes there are these like third party type politicians or maybe populists that come out and they talk about those things, but they never get very far. I mean, not lately.
yeah, yeah. And if it is, it's also if it comes from another source that's more mainstream, it's kind of blowing smoke up people's ass. It's just
Yeah, and
saying it
that's
because it
another
it
concern too, is
yeah.
I feel like sometimes it could be a way to seem relatable or something to a huge
Mhm.
demographic. But the thing is, at the end of the day, it's not really going to change anything or anybody's circumstances.
Right.
Um, so that's interesting, by the way, what you said about feeling like you could never afford a home in Florida, because I'm like a native Californian, and
Hmm.
obviously, 20 years ago, a lot of people could afford in certain areas that were kind of like untapped, right? That's how
Right.
my parents did it. They had always they grew up. My parents are both from LA or like, Southern California,
Hmm.
and they moved up to Northern California because they could afford something there. And
Right.
then they got really lucky with that. And I think that basically changed the trajectory for the rest of their, lives in terms of finances, at least.
Sure.
But I can't afford anywhere in California, you know what I mean? 20 years later, 30 years later.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy because you always hear, as a Californian, you always hear about like other states, these other states that you should move to instead. And not necessarily saying I'm going to do that or anything, but you hear it so much in the news and from other people. And I feel like Florida is one of those ones that maybe 10 years ago, a ton of people were saying, go move to Florida. And I can only imagine the impact that had. And I don't really like the whole like Californication thing, because I feel like it's kind of insulting as like a working class Californian.
Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from. Yeah.
But I could imagine that like there must be like I don't know, all these people like immigrating there basically and moving there to have an opportunity, but then that takes away the opportunity from people who are from there.
Right. You're 100% correct. And to shorten it into as shortly as I can, because I don't want to expand on it, but basically we're experiencing and have been experiencing over the past couple of years, the past about 3 years, a mass exodus, a mass migration from people around the country moving to Florida because the land was cheap. And they're let's just face it, they're working in various sectors throughout, maybe tech sectors or whatever, in various other states, and they make a lot of money. And buying a house outright for $200,000 cash isn't a big deal for them. And they could be from Austin, Texas, and they come here and they buy out a house and they flip it, or they turn it into a rental property to have that static income, and then they go buy one of the various McMansions in an upscale area. In wherever they're going to be working or whatever, what have you. And that takes away opportunity for home ownership from people who would be working class and are looking here to try and get their first starter home. Remember when that was a topic that people would say, well, you have to look for your first starter home, the fixer upper. And it's just like, those don't exist.
What are you talking about?
Those don't exist.
And not to, I didn't even think about this, but so many parts of, I think, especially Central Florida, were hit really hard with the recession, right? And all the foreclosures.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because it was basically all these like weird, like gated communities had popped up, where people had developed all this land and then no one could afford them. And it's like, so who owns them now?
Right. It was hyper development, and like everything got foreclosed on and went back to the ownership of the banks, but then they were able to sell them again because they're like, well, no one can afford these. We're not going to lower the price. And then eventually they just waited and waited and waited and waited. And they waited it out long enough so that there would be that mass immigration of people who would say, I don't want to live in Texas. I don't want to live in New York. I don't want to live in California. And I have the money and the capital to be able to move to a place like Florida and meet a quality life that exceeds where I was and still allows me to have a lot of opportunity.
It's really kind of depressing. The whole housing thing is so crazy.
Like, aside from those individuals who are very insulated by their socioeconomic status, they're not able to look at the rest of the country or the people they work with side by side, or even the people who are in their office at work, and be like, oh, they're working at this, a great company like I am, or working at a great place like I am. They're probably doing just as well as I am. And that perspective is very skewed. And it's because we have this kind of gag order on talking about what you make or what you can afford, because it's very gauche. It's viewed as very, very, oh no, that's we don't talk about that. And people should have conversations more, because it would open up, I think, a lot of people's eyes. People are, just because someone has done very well for themselves doesn't mean that they're an uncaring monster. It just means that they don't have the same awareness, because why would they? No one ever, they're not going to listen to things that are they hear their feel-good stories on NPR every once in a while. And that's about the extent of it. They don't want to know that the guy in the cubicle 2 rows from them is barely making ends meet. They don't want to hear that.
I think what's really interesting is you're totally right about all that. But also, I feel like I've worked for people, the owners of the business that I've worked at, who pay me, who sign my checks, who, file my W-2 or whatever.
Right.
They know exactly how much they're sending me home with, but they act like it's like this secret or like this mystery, and they act like they have no idea how little I make. And it's like, and at the same time, like, sometimes they kind of want to be friends, and then they say little things once in a while where you're like, oh my God, you know how broke I am.
Right.
You pay me and
Yeah.
you send me home with these conditions and you don't give me benefits and everything. And I'm going to sit here and listen to you complain about like your kids' preschool tuition or something. And like, it's
Right.
just, it's so frustrating, but
Mhm.
also like, you're like, why aren't we talking more openly about this? Because we all know what we're kind of making.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
is it like a secret that I'm, not making millions of dollars? I obviously am not. And
Right.
and so it's really frustrating when it's coming from the person who like clearly knows exactly what you're making.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and they kind of act like if they don't say it, then they don't have to address the fact that they're sending people home with like starvation wages.
Right. If they don't say it's not real.
Right.
So
And if they don't
therefore,
say
I'm not,
what they make, you can't compare it.
right. So I'm not hurting anyone because it's not
Yeah.
real. And I think that's the other thing too, is like it's not, like I said, we have no solutions for this. It's just matter of fact. I felt recently over the past 2 or 3 years, especially since the birth of my son, like being pragmatic about things is far more helpful than trying to win over a lot of people you may meet in your job with theory, or with really just talking to people and having open conversations, even if they're kind of awkward at first, isn't the worst thing in the world. And just being a little bit more pragmatic about how we talk to people can actually build a better sense of like, oh, you know what, I'm not alone. Like, and other people begin to have that same realization too, that, you know what, I'm not the only person on the planet that's actually really struggling right now.
That's
because
true.
we all know it.
Yeah.
And very few of us say it aloud.
That kind of reminded me of like, so during COVID, it's so funny because there's been so many people of like people in my family, people who I like worked for, like, all these different people. And we've talked about like being on unemployment. And because so many people, even if they, weren't necessarily like completely destroyed by COVID or something, a lot of them signed up for unemployment anyways. And we had to talk about like the frustrations of like getting paid and getting in the system and all these things.
Yeah.
And it kind of leveled the playing field in a funny way to like call my grandma up and be like, oh, like unemployment, this and that. And like, we never really talked about money normally. And so that's kind of interesting. Yeah, maybe it's leveled the playing field a little bit for people to just like talk openly about it, because it's like, obviously we're all going broke.
Well, right. And you did a video on unemployment and kind of transitioning back into the workplace while being able to say, there are some dignities and some ideas that must be met when going back to a workplace where all of a sudden the workers matter a lot, and that they should be treated not only better, but also that you're worth a lot more than what you think you are. Because obviously without that, the system kind of falls apart, right? You need those cogs, or the machine doesn't work, right? It doesn't turn at all.
Pretty much.
And you made a great video about that. And that video kind of touched on those ideas that, listen, if you're going back, most people, you address the big elephant in the room, which everyone knows. It's like, hey, if you go and you work full, you won't ever work full time. They'll cut you at 39 hours because they don't want you to work full time, because they don't want to pay you benefits. So if you're at 40 hours a week and you're making minimum wage and you're on unemployment and you're making more money, for a year now, a good majority of the country said, I don't know why I was working that job, 2 gig jobs, a side business, doing everything. I don't know why I was doing it. And even people who weren't working the even people who had careers, good jobs with good wages, all of a sudden said, I didn't get a chance to interact with my family for 5 years. I watched my kids grow up without me. I barely know my family anymore, my brothers or sisters or father or mother. I haven't spoken with them in a year or something. And they began to realize that I gave it all up, and I don't know why I did it, because I don't have anything to show for it. Like,
and a lot of people, any progress that they had made before the pandemic
was robbed. It's gone.
Completely gone. And I mean, we experienced that. My husband finally had gotten out of the restaurant industry after like almost 15, 20 years, like something like that.
Right.
And he finally got a good job, a salary job, doing something really cool. And he was working during like school hours, basically. So it was perfect for
Mhm.
our family. And it's gone. It's just
Right.
gone. And there's
Right.
nothing, it's not like he can just switch to a different like the same job in a different, office or something, because it was like
Right.
this really unique situation.
Yeah.
And he's like really bummed about that. And
Yeah. Of
not to mention
course.
the fact that like a lot of people probably spent years in the same company working up the
Yeah.
ladder or whatever, as they say, and then
Right.
it's just all gone.
And that's what I mean by kind of that like aspirational trajectory where as you head on that path, you begin to feel like, oh my, wait a minute, this is doable.
Mhm.
This is real. This can happen. This mobility can occur. And you start feeling good about it. And then
Mhm.
you start, what happens is that there's an awful tendency as you start heading on this path where you start feeling this anxiety that someone's going to pull the rug out from underneath of you. Something's going to happen
Yeah.
that's going to pull you off that path, while say looking at generational differences and generational wealth differences. Look at the baby boomers as just a core example, or Gen X. That didn't occur.
Mhm.
The setbacks where you lost that dream job, for instance, if this is 1995 and your husband had lost that dream job, there would have been a multitude of jobs that he could have taken that would have fulfilled the same needs, if not exceeded them.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden those jobs, not only have they dwindled and become incredibly I just hit my mic.
It's
I'm
okay.
gesturing too much
I
because
do
I'm
that
getting
like
too heated.
constantly.
I'm there's those jobs are not only incredibly difficult to get into. You're
Mhm.
going through your 7, 8, 9 step interview process for these
God,
jobs.
it's so stupid.
And you can imagine 1995 and you get your first interview and they say you're hired and you work there for 25 years and that's it. And you're like, wait a minute. And you look at the same requirements for the same job now and be like, oh,
Mhm.
well, not only have you been grandfathered into the role in a fashion that has been completely like quieted with no additional certifications necessary, but
Mhm.
somebody who got in is like they're there on a bachelor's degree and now this job requires a master's degree at entry level with a $37,000 pay cut.
Yeah.
And just be like, wait a minute, how does this work? Like, first
Yeah.
of all, just putting fairness aside, I mean, at what point are we able to aspire to better tomorrows and a better life for ourselves and our neighborhood and our community and our families above all,
Mhm.
without feeling like at any minute the
It's just
frailty, the
gone.
fragility of it, it's just so recognizable and it will be just taken away immediately.
Yeah,
And
and
it's incredibly difficult.
yeah, it's like at least if you knew that no matter what happened, that you would be able to get, see a doctor, you'd have like some like food stamps or EBT or anything like that. Like,
Right.
but like with maybe like a little bit better of a threshold, because the means testing is ridiculous on that, especially these days.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
making sure that like housing is affordable and everything. If you did get the rug pulled out from underneath you, it wouldn't be so scary, right?
Right. Right.
Because you would have that safety net, but we just don't have that, and it's really
Mhm.
it really sucks. But like something you said about people realizing, looking back on their 40 hours and going, why did I do this? I'm experiencing that a lot right now because so many people are going back to work, and I'm trying to like create stuff online. But the thing is, the amount I make on unemployment is pretty much on par with what I was making anyways. Like
Mhm.
it's not very different, which a lot of people took a huge pay cut on unemployment, right? It was like, for me, it was pretty much what I was making anyways. So
Right.
now if I go off of that and return to work, I'm like, I'm working and I'm still poor. Right? Like, you get what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's so frustrating
The
because
working class became the
I'm like,
working
why
poor,
would I
and that
go
was
back? Because I would be making the exact same money
right.
but I have none of my time to do any of this.
Mhm.
And so I'm really in a very frustrating spot right now, because I will have to probably eventually do something, but I'm kind of
Right.
holding out and seeing
Right.
if maybe I can pump those numbers up,
A lot of other people are too, and
Yeah, which good. I'm glad.
and there's an interesting
Make them
aside where
squirm,
yeah, and make them squirm a little bit when you talk to people about this that are older.
Mhm.
And you talk to them about your woes, or you do disclose what your current situation is, the immediate knee-jerk reaction in most instances is, why don't you just work harder? And it's just like, what do you mean work harder? There's nothing to do to work harder. You
Yeah.
cannot manifest opportunity when opportunity does not exist. And when those
Yeah.
opportunities that are rare and true do come along, again, all what it takes is one thing to knock you back down. It
Mm-hmm.
it's a very odd conversation to have. And I think I understand why, actually, is because I do truly believe, and this is my personal belief, doesn't mean it has to translate to everybody else. I do truly believe that a lot of people who are Gen Xers and baby boomers know how fortunate they are. And they've lived lives that are incredibly rich and blessed. And they know that. They know that. They're very aware of that. And there's a shame in it because they
Mm-hmm.
do understand. Denial is very powerful. It's not just a river in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
I think
That's a
a
good
real thing.
point. I think you're right. Because there's a certain what's the word, like the certain like tone they get when you bring it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
it's
some of
they
them
get
are a little
uncomfortable.
more forgiving than others, but yeah, I think
Yeah.
it is uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
I think it's important that I wish people could understand that they don't necessarily have to like give everything up to like
Right.
admit it.
Yeah,
And rather
exactly.
just like be a little bit more conscious of it and be like appreciative, I guess, or like
Yeah.
or just respectful of people who aren't in the same
Yeah.
financial situation as
Yeah.
them, because I think especially in like the customer service industry, you get a weird classism from people. And you're like, I really wish that you would stop being like this, because I'm just trying to be nice. And I don't
Sure.
know, like you tell people what you do on your days off, and you're like, oh, I really don't want to have this conversation with you specifically, because
Right. Well,
people are weird about it.
they do get weird about it, and I think they get weird about it too because then I'm far and away from the first person to posit this, but obviously when you kind of don't feel like you have power, we were talking about the rug being pulled out from underneath of you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the more you acquire, that same feeling's still there.
Yeah.
So you take that and it manifests into, I must do everything I can to preserve this.
You don't want to
And
jinx
then
it. Yeah.
I don't want to jinx it. And I also have power when I'm able to talk to somebody who is working and they're below me, because it's a transactional relationship and they're like, I am the king, I am the president, I am right. And that power dynamic creates a really, really gross interaction often. And we see it people always de facto result in, the kind of like looking at TikTok or YouTube compilations of people treating employers or people, employees really poorly. And especially during COVID, that was a very popular thing too. And it's just like, I don't find any of it to be amusing or funny. It's just really sad and tragic because I don't know why people are treating each other like this to begin with, other than they feel like I don't have any power in my own life. And this is the only instance where I can exercise it. And someone's going to have to agree with me and tell me I'm right.
Yeah.
Because that's the way the system is engineered, because that's the way it works. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, fuck all those people that harass hourly employees and stuff.
That goes without saying.
What you said about people kind of being in denial about it. The other thing is, a lot of people, especially like middle class people, they feel like they can't do anything about it anyway. Like other than literally giving away all their money, which wouldn't solve anything.
Right.
They feel like there's really not anything that they can do for people, but that's not true. I think that being class conscious and understanding that, and like empowering workers and stuff, is effective and wouldn't ruin their lives to help or admit or anything, right? And it's not going to make them lose everything.
No, not at all.
But at the end of the day, I wish that like this group of people who saw what it was like to grow up more middle class and now are finding themselves without opportunity, I wish that they would, instead of like aspiring to become landlords or whatever, I wish that they would just kind of like own it and help each other and lift each other up and say like, hey, we have to stand together if we want better conditions, because it's literally the only thing that's going to work. I mean, it's really tough, because even at the end of the day, that might not work, and usually doesn't. But it could if we all kind of woke up a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, I think so too. And I also think it's important, on the same note, that for everybody who's listening, or everybody who listens to the podcast or watches your videos or or is tuned into any of these struggles or whatever, is like like I had mentioned pragmatism before, like that doesn't mean giving up hope, by the way.
Yeah.
Like it is okay to hope. I don't
Yeah.
say stake all of your energy and just be like, I can sleep peacefully at night because I'm hopeful. No, that's not what I mean. Again, pragmatism. But it is
Yeah.
okay to have hope, we don't have to
Yeah.
spend every single
Nihilism
day.
isn't very fun. I
Right.
can
Like
tell you firsthand.
yeah, exactly. Same here. Like being a doomer is not going to solve
Depends
your
on the day,
problems.
but yeah, that's usually kind of I try to maintain hope. I think that's true. And I also want to just address the fact that yes, like because obviously we just talked about kind of the differences, you growing up like very working class, me growing up middle class, and still kind of ending up maybe in similar places anyways.
Right. Yeah.
That despite all that, like not me specifically, but someone in a situation more like mine can take more risks. And like me specifically, I can do this, and I know that if something really bad happened, me and my kids would be able to live at my parents' house. And some people don't have that. Some people, their parents are incarcerated, or they're not alive. They have no money.
Right.
They're paying for their parents, right? They're supporting their own parents.
Sure. Yeah.
So these are very different situations, and it's important to like address that. But that at the end of the day, like, yeah, I think a lot of us need to just come together and stop trying to crawl on top of one another is basically my point.
Right. And
that seems to be the only way to get ahead.
Right. No, I think it's important. And discussing about how like mutual aid or community action or outreach factors into all of this. Again, don't have the answers. Don't have that for you. I wish I did. I just know too that in my own community, one of the best things I can do here is just like talk to people and get to know people and create, what little networks you can. And as soon as you start talking to people, it doesn't matter who they are, you begin to realize there's a lot of people who are in the same boat, or they know someone who's in similar boats. So, I mean, I don't know. I just think it's, I guess, be a good person is not the best.
At the end of the day, be a good person. No, I think talking to people who might not have the privilege that you have is important. Talking to people who come from a different background or something, I think it can be humbling, and I think that people can be empathetic, even if that's not usually their go-to. So I think it's something that we could all work on a little bit. And in conclusion, we live in a society.
We do. We truly live in a society.
It's truly a society.
Take off the Joker makeup. Just take off the Joker makeup a little bit. You can smear it, leave some on.
I don't even bother putting it on these days,
Why bother? It's a waste,
Yeah. But yeah. And you know what? One of my favorite comments that I got, I forget who posted it, but someone was like, it was really frustrating because, I grew up and I did everything my parents told me, and I went to college and I didn't do drugs and I didn't smoke cigarettes and I didn't do this and that and the other thing. And now I'm like in debt, working class. I work all the time. I never have any fun, like this kind of thing. And it's like, I got a couple comments, I think, kind of to that effect. And people being very frustrated that they're like, I did everything I was told to do and it didn't work. And it's kind of a scam. I don't know. It feels like a scam.
It's heartbreaking because, like I said, like I have a similar position where I've been fortunate enough to see what I would almost call like the opposite side of the coin, where I'm like, wait a minute, I'm playing the game. I'm doing things as I'm supposed to. I'm following the rules. I'm not breaking the law. Except just like that. And then I'm getting the college degree. I'm getting the 2 college degrees. I'm doing everything to make myself more marketable and everything else. And then all of a sudden, like one thing can happen in your life.
Yeah.
And it's all gone. And it could be, and I'm not saying it's something you did. It's something that you have to respond to, like your parents getting sick.
Yeah.
And then you have to say, what do I do? It's not just a choice
or something.
Right. It's not one of these moments where it's just like, well, I got to keep working. And most of us do, but it's just like, well, no, like there's no one there. They don't have anyone. I don't have a brother. I don't have a sister. There is no one there to help them. This is it. And so I think that's important to just be like, it's the heartbreaking thing about it is at some point you think maybe it could actually work. But the reality is that it often 99.9% of the time doesn't. And that's not a good track record, So
and I think that's why people from like your background, my background, all sorts of different backgrounds, everyone wants to be a millionaire because the whole thing is that if you were a millionaire, then these little things, these little bumps in the road wouldn't be such a big deal. You wouldn't lose everything. You would lose some of your wealth, and you would be able to regain it before, anything else happened. And that's why everyone wants to be a millionaire, because they have no social safety net. And if we had a social safety net, maybe we could all stop trying to become millionaires, or daydreaming about what we would do and who we would give the money to and who we would help first and everything, because it's like this pathetic little dream we have, because it's the only thing we can do is just hope that we're bulletproof someday. And it sucks.
Yeah, no, it's not really ideal.
Sucks.
Not
it's
ideal
like,
at all.
It's like, my other thing is like, I kind of thought, oh, this is just like my young and broke phase, right? Oh, like I was in community college, and then like, oh, like you're like a starving artist. And then you're like, no, I'm 30 and I'm still like, my bank account is overdrawn. And this wasn't supposed to be happening still.
Right. Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Exactly. And it's people who've been on every side of the up and every side of the down. Yep. And are all kind of now in our current space, in this current time, mostly in the same boat. No matter how you kind of put everybody into different buckets, that is categorized by, do they have a family to rely on? Do they not have a family to rely on? Do they have healthcare? Do they not have healthcare? You really divvy it up, and everybody's almost in the same bucket.
Yeah, I mean,
one wrong thing and it is
exactly
all gone. Everything.
Yeah, obviously some people do have some advantages, but they're really not that big of differences when you like look at the scale of what can happen to you.
Right.
Either way, we're mostly all kind of fucked.
Yeah.
This has been Riches to Rags with Kelgo and Brian. This is NPR.
This is NPR. Next time.
Well, this was wonderful to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
And I hope that I wish you luck in all your future endeavors.
Thank you.
And
you as well.
I hope that you become a millionaire soon.
Well, yeah, we're all hoping. We're all keeping our fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Something happens, even though you don't buy lotto tickets.
Yeah,
somehow you win a lottery anyway.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome. This is probably going to be longer than 30 minutes because I don't really want to cut any of this out. So, oh well. Bonus episode.